Jai Gurudev. This is a short video to show how the Lagnesh does not get the doshas of being the 6th, 8th, and 12th Lord versus how the Lagnesh will be considered tainted sitting in the 6th, 8th, or 12th house. Okay, so let's start with an example. Okay, so here we have a Taurus Lagna Kundali or Rishabh, right? So we know that the Lagnesh in Taurus Lagna Kundali is Shukra or Venus. So we can see in this Kundali that Venus, being the Lagnesh, has the lordship of the 6th house. 6th house is a Dusthana house. Therefore, the lordship is bad. But because it is the Lagnesh, you will say that Shukra will not do the negative roles of a 6th house lord because it has the power of being a Lagnesh. Similarly, you will say that Jupiter, being the 8th house lord, is very dangerous for Taurus Lagna because it has the lordship of 8th house, right? And also the 12th house, which is ruled by Mars, Mars being the 12th house lord, will have a malefic impact for Taurus Lagna people because it's the 12th house lord. But Shukra, being the 6th house lord, is exempted from doing bad because it is the Lagnesh. Okay, now supposing in the same example of a Taurus Lagna, okay, let's say the Lagnesh is sitting in the 6th house. So let's say the Venus planet is sitting in the 6th house. Now how will you interpret this? So we already know that it will not get the doshas of being a 6th house lord, but we will say that the planet itself as a planet is sitting in an uncomfortable house. It is sitting in the 6th house. So that means despite being Swarashi, because it is sitting in a negative house, it will not be able to perform fully. Sitting in a bad house, sitting in a house of its dislike, makes the planet not perform to its fullest potential. Okay, so there's a reduction in the efficacy of the planet. Now let's take another example. Say it is Virgo Lagna. Okay, and here say Jupiter is sitting in the 8th house. So how will you interpret this? You will say that Jupiter is sitting in the Dusthan, 8th house. Therefore, it will not be able to perform 100%. it won't give 100% result despite having the lordship of two Kendra houses, fourth house and the seventh house. Because its placement is bad, as a planet it will not be able to perform 100% even though it is sitting in a friendly sign, right? So this is how it gets impacted. Okay, so now just by the virtue of sitting in the eighth house, and here we can see, for example, the eighth house lord and the sixth house lord. The eighth house lord is Surya and the sixth house lord is Rahu and Shani. So we will say that the planets Rahu, Shani and Surya will have a malefic impact for Kanya Lagna. Why? Not because they are sitting there, but because they are the lords of Dusthanas, sixth house and the eighth house. Okay? So Surya could be sitting in your say a 10th house. But because it has the lordship of a bad place, it will bring the negative effects of 12th house into your 10th house. So that means losses in career. 12th house significations coming in the 10th house. Alright, so despite being in a very good position in 10th, place of directional strength, Surya's bad lordship will make Surya a bad planet for Virgo Lagna. Alright, now let's take another example for Surya and Chandra. Okay, now we will use the same Kundali. Okay, so in the earlier example, we said that Surya is the 12th house lord and it will do damage to the native's career, sitting in if it sits in the 10th house because it has a lordship of a Dusthan. Okay, but but because the planet is Surya, it will because the planet is Surya here, the lord of the 12th house is Surya, Surya being Surya, will never do damage to the native. Native means the Lagna. Okay, so even if its lordship is of a negative place of a 12th house, if it sits in the 10th house, Surya, it will not do any damage because then the 12th house lordship rules are not applicable. It will only bring out the positive aspects of the 12th house into the 10th house. Alright, now let's take another example. Let's make Chandra sit in a bad place. Okay. Rather, let's make Chandra the owner of a bad house. Okay. What is the worst house for Chandra? Eighth house. Okay. So I put Chandra's ownership. It owns only one sign, Kark. So I make it the owner of the eighth house. So it means that is the eighth house lord. Okay. Now I make Chandra sit in the Lagna. So by logic, we know that eighth house lord will always do damage to the Lagna. But here we will contradict that rule and we will say no, because eighth house lord is moon or Chandra. It will do positive to the native because Chandra is माँ और माँ अपने बच्चे का कभी अहित नहीं करती. So despite having negative lordship, it will not do damage to the native. But things, if Chandra, say it is a, again I'm making Virgo as a Lagna. If Chandra was sitting in the 8th house, whether it is Swarashi or Mitra Rashi or Friendly Rashi, you will say that Chandra is not well placed in this chart. So there is a reduction in the performance of the planet. Even if in Dhanu Lagna, say Chandra instead of sitting here was sitting in 8th house itself, Swarashi, you will say that Chandra will not get the dosh of being the 8th house lord, but Chandra is sitting in a Dusthana, therefore there is a reduction in the performance of the planet. But despite it, because it is Swarashi, it will be a little bit better. Okay, let me know if you have any doubts. Jai Gurudev.